So, welcome everyone to another session of Joint School Live. I'm really pleased today to be joined by in fact an old friend who I studied medicine with at university, who will be sharing his experiences of having a hip replacement not too long thereafter. And just before we dive in, I just want to, I'm always waving that safety flag just to say that of course everyone's experience is different. Nothing we discuss here or in any other videos in the Joint School Live are medical advice, but I'm hoping that by hearing from Dr. Zak Nathan's story and his experience, that we'll be adding to the comparatively less amount of information that there is for younger people having hip replacements, particularly in the 20s and 30s. And so, without too much further ado, here we are. Welcome, Zak.
Hi, Axel.
Thanks so much for joining us all the way from Perth. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of who you are and what you do before we dive into the topic at hand, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a Manchester medicine graduate, obviously where I met Axel, and then we met up subsequently as I was doing after my GP training, and I'd moved the other side of the world to sunny Perth. And I'm currently working here as a GP, having trained in sunny Blackpool of all places. And yeah, that's probably where I'm up to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on board and sharing your experience. And I think based on the questions that have been sent in, and as ever, thank you to everyone watching this who sent in a question. And as ever, feel free to comment in the video below or send any feedback and suggestions for other videos to cover. And indeed, if by the end of this you feel that there's something that we can dig into a bit more in this topic, then please do let us know. But because of course, I mean, there'll be people out there now who are in, I guess, a bit of a similar situation to where you were when the idea of having a hip replacement first started. Like, can you tell us a bit about that? How old were you, and what kind of led up to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess my story is similar but in very different circumstances. My story was that I had a bad hip, and I went to see an orthopaedic surgeon, and he did an arthroscopy and said, yeah, you've got a really bad hip, you need to look after it. And there was kind of nothing else said. And then it was, significantly impacting on pretty much everything I did. And then I went back for another opinion, another arthroscopy. Oh yeah, your hip's considerably worse than it was last time. We probably need to think about doing a hip replacement. But we want to leave that as long as possible. So, I was then in this sort of slightly uncertain boat of, you need to put it off as long as possible, but, how long is too long? And yeah. I guess, people are in the same position now, but probably for a different reason.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. We touched on that in last week's interview with Professor Tim Board about that, finding that balance about when is the right time, and that can be a difficult decision in many ways in the best of times. And now, of course, with coronavirus and everything, that those decisions are even more challenging, and people don't really have the liberty to have as much agency about those decisions, which can indeed further add to uncertainty and anxieties and things around that. So yes, that's absolutely, and hopefully then things like this may help to to see what someone else's experience was like when and what the next steps may be like. And so around that time, how old were you then?
I think I was 24 when I first injured my hip, and then it was a process of kind of 4 or 5 years, until I got to the point where I met Professor Board, and we started having that really kind of frank discussion about hip replacement, and that was because I'd sought him out because I'd heard such good reviews. So I should mention he wasn't the orthopedic I saw before. So,
okay. And so you were 24 years old, and you had an injury. Was it a particular injury that you had, or was it something that had been leading up to it before, or?
No, it actually was a kind of sudden event, but it wasn't a traumatic event. So it wasn't the classical, car accident, anything like that tend to kind of get younger people into hip replacements. Mine was a fairly innocuous injury that then ended up being the definite trigger, because there was nothing else that it could have been. And it was only kind of in retrospect that we really narrowed it down to that. And it just, it kind of grumbled along for a number of years, like I said, and then kind of I was 28, I think, when I met Prof. Board.
Wow. So a bit of an unusual start, but then I guess what was the lead up? What were those sort of years like up until making that decision? Sort of what drove the decision really?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was a pretty tough one, because I think, in the position I was in at med school, you're kind of, you're the patient, but you've also got a bit of knowledge, but that knowledge isn't particularly worldly. It's all very textbook related. This is what you should do. This is the advice I should give someone, but how do I do me? And that was really hard, because, I was kind of completely limited from doing all of the activities I wanted to do. And kind of given this idea of, well, just come back and see me when it's really bad.
Yeah. No, because I remember you were quite active, and so how was it limiting? I mean, was there a particular point where you realized that no, this is too much? I need to.
I mean, the sad truth is, it was painful every day, and I was one of those stoic people that I didn't want to, just pump myself full of, medication to then carry on doing something that was hurting me. So I was trying to modify my activities and be a bit more mindful of not doing the things that really, really hurt it. But, still playing competitive sport, and then, being absolutely crippled for days after playing a game of football. And then, the silly juvenile, and you just think, oh, well, it'll be fine. I'll be okay for next week. And then you just keep going.
And so tell me more about when the decision had been made and the lead up to the operation. What kind of thoughts were going through your head? And let's walk through those steps again a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, mine might be a slightly unusual one, as I said, because of the journey I took. I went to see a GP in like near the university halls, and they kind of fobbed me off twice and said, oh, it's nothing, let it go. And I was like, no, there's definitely something wrong. And then ended up really, really pushing it, and then got asked them to privately refer me to an orthopaedic surgeon, because they refused to send me anywhere publicly. At that point, then the kind of ball got rolling, and we got some scans, and then that's when I had the first arthroscopy done, because he thought I had a tear in the labrum, which is a pretty common sporting injury. So I was kind of hopeful that was the case, and then kind of came round from the arthroscopy to be told that my hip was, grade 3 or 4 arthritis, absolutely ruined inside. And that wasn't what I was expecting at all. And then I kind of wasn't really given much else about that. It was kind of a case of, oh, just, try and carry on doing what you're doing, but, you should be okay. And then I kind of, obviously that didn't sit particularly well, because then all those questions arise in your mind of, well, what does that actually mean? What can I do? What can't I do? I then ended up getting to see a rheumatologist, because I thought, there must be some form of sort of active arthritis in here that I'm not aware of. So I was kind of doing this self-directed journey of no one's really taking any kind of direction of this, so I'm just going to do it myself.
And I guess that's something that many people who find themselves being sort of not having not being the typical case of a condition, be it that you're a young person having a hip replacement, or indeed other things. I think it's unfortunately not an altogether unusual experience to have to sort of fall between the chairs a little bit of easy categorization when you have something that's not sort of as not the most common scenario. Of course, that's not always the case, but I think
no, you're absolutely right. And I think looking back on it, obviously as a general practitioner now, I kind of feel like maybe having someone that until I met Prof. Board, there was really no one that kind of orchestrated anything. I felt like I was the driver, and actually it would have been quite nice to have someone else pushing me into like different thought processes and decisions, because I was just sort of, like you said, desperately searching for someone to take that responsibility. And you know, until I met him, I couldn't find it. So.
Well, and tell us more then about your thought processes around. So when you'd arrived at having a hip replacement and you were 28, 29 years old, what were your concerns, and what sort of how did you prepare for the operation?
Well, at that time I was part of the Army Reserve, so I'd managed to get my way through the physical, and every 6 months you have to do a personal fitness test in the Army, and it included sit-ups, press-ups, and a 1.5 mile best effort run. And it just every 6 months that run was just killing me, like, you know, so I couldn't train for it. I was trying to train to get a decent time, and then every time it came round, it was like dread. And I just remember saying to my now wife, like, this is messed up. Like, I shouldn't be in this much pain trying to do something as simple as a 1.5 mile run. And then I just sort of thought to myself, I think now is the time. You know, I'd set in my head, I want to get to 30. I don't know why. I think just, you know, people do that. You set a number in your head. And I thought, I think the last time I'd had an arthroscopy, or maybe it was the first time after I'd met Professor Board, he'd said, if you get a year out of your hip, I'll be very impressed. So obviously, you know, I thought I'll get 3, you know.
I recognize that mindset.
Yeah.
And then just if we zoom in a little bit closer to the operation, so the days just before, what did you do to prepare for the operation itself, and so on?
I think that's a good question. I mean, the real, I think in some respects, for my personality type, the fact that I'd actually done quite a lot of orthopaedics and assisted in a number of hip replacements, it really settled me, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew what they were doing. I knew surgically what they were doing. So all of those kind of natural questions, I guess, that most people would have, I was quite comfortable with. So I guess mine was an unusual pre-op journey, in the sense that I didn't have any worry at all. I was extremely confident in Prof. Board and his capabilities, largely because I'd met him, and I knew what his credentials were. So I was kind of unusually serene, and whereas most people around me were getting quite nervous for me. So.
Okay, yeah, interesting. But I guess maybe, you know, not everyone will have the benefit of assisting in a hip replacement, and not everyone indeed may want to. But of course, I think that there's something within that, is that sort of knowledge is power in those situations. Being able to have a clear idea of what is going to happen, you know, and what to expect afterwards. Indeed, I think that can really help to, you know, answer questions, help relieve some of the anxiety that I think is very natural to feel before an event such as an operation like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's where the beauty of like personalized medicine comes in, because, you know, everyone's different. Some people would want to know everything, some people wouldn't. And I just kind of felt like I'm fortunate in that I'm in the position I am, that I do know a decent amount. And I thought, you know, I need to just entrust myself to these people, because this is what I tell people to do all the time. So.
Yeah. And just to sort of stay on the pre-op phase, like as a GP now, I presume, you know, every now and again you'll be referring patients to orthopedic surgeons and discussing the possibility of hip replacements. Is there anything in particular that you say to patients, and not necessarily only sort of younger patients having hip replacements, in terms of that experience, and what to expect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess, you know, there's so much more in the sphere of pre-operative, you know, care and trying to prehab people and get their muscles working better than they are, especially in the younger people, but equally too with anyone that's going through it. So I guess when I'm talking to people, I just kind of explain, I can take them through the whole journey. So if you can find something that they're not so good at, you can work on that pre-op, and then you can use that to build up a little bit of motivation and enthusiasm for what they're then going to be doing afterwards. So I do try and instill the importance of the fact that what you put in is what you get out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Interesting. And in terms of your sort of immediate post-operative experience, then what were the sort of the first days and weeks after surgery like?
they weren't great, and I thought I was going to be absolutely fine. You know, young patient, no medical problems. You know, thought, oh, I'll sail through this, no drama. But you know, that was the kind of unusual part for me, where my kind of expectations were different to the reality, and that was just purely on the, you know, it might just be a personal thing, but you know, I felt hugely anemic, even though I wasn't, but I dropped a certain amount. You know, my pain was very difficult to manage, which I didn't expect. You know, and so those sorts of things which were completely unexpected, you know, pose difficulties, but you know, they came through them, and you know, thankfully really well. But I often just highlight to people that, you know, sometimes you might think it's going to be reasonably easy, but it, you know, the aftermath of having major surgery isn't wonderful.
Yeah, and how long would you say, so that challenging period, that when you think back on it, how long did that last, and was there anything in particular that helped you manage that time, or help to alleviate some of those symptoms?
I think, you know, obviously time is so important because of all the healing, but for me, it was just the anemia. I couldn't stand up. You know, I was so hypotensive when I stood up, and it, you know, no matter how much I drank, it was just purely from the drop in my red blood cells, which I just didn't anticipate. So you're trying to do everything you should, you know, stand up often, get your muscles moving, but every time you stand up, you feel sick. It's really hard, and then there's nothing you can do, because you know full well it's just about a matter of waiting until your body makes more red blood cells. So.
Yeah. And so how long did it take really until you were through that?
I think I was 4 to 6 weeks. I was crutches, and I was, you know, I was doing my graduated increasing walking, an extra lamppost every day, and I just noticed, you know, it was genuinely that there wasn't like a monumental time. It just, each time, instead of feeling completely puffed after, you know, 100 meters, I then walked 120, and then I did 140 the next day, and then 160, and then before I knew it, I was kind of walking to town and back, and it was, and then I ditched the crutches and I felt like a human again.
And now, looking back now, is there anything that you would do differently in terms of I guess you had an unusual sort of journey just before the surgery, and perhaps felt as you're as prepared as you'd ever be, but in terms of those 4 to 6 weeks afterwards, is there anything that you would do differently now, or?
I guess it's sort of like, if you could go back and tell yourself, you know, you're going to feel worse than you think you are. Like, you know, it's sort of one of those things, expect for the worst. And, you know, and if anything else is an absolute bonus. Whereas I think I naively just thought, because I've had such an easy ride, you know, the whole way through, I figured I would be the same, which, you know, sadly wasn't the case, but that's all right. That's part of the experience.
Yeah, indeed. And was there any sort of one piece of advice or anything that you found particularly helpful, or did you have a goal that you were aiming for at the end of it all?
You know, one of the best pieces of advice is actually the advice I had, and I always give now to everyone, is there's a fear when you've had all of this lead up, and then someone's gone and put this metal thing in you, that you're going to do something to mess it up. Yeah. And even with all the kind of knowledge that I had, I just, every time you do something and twist funny, you wonder whether you've like slipped it or twisted it, or, you know, you get the twinges in the muscles and you think, is that my body telling me not to do it? But the best thing I remember saying, I went back to the post-op clinic, which was 8 weeks after the op. And I remember Prof. Board coming in, and I just said to him, look, this is going to sound like a really, really silly question, but can I get back on a bike? And he was like, absolutely, you will not damage that hip. I've put it in, unless you fall over, it's not going anywhere. And I remember that was just like everything I needed to hear, because up until that point, I was so concerned about undoing all of this work, you know, or doing something silly and then, you know, damaging it. Whereas actually being able to tell people those little twinges, those feelings that you have when you think, oh, should I do that? Should I not? Yeah. Within reason, that's okay.
Yeah. Interesting. And I guess that, because that's something that we see through, you know, with questions coming in from the Joint School app and the forums and previously with the other iterations of the My Recovery app, there's a lot of concern around doing too much, doing some kind of damage, and I guess particularly so for those who are going to be, who know that they're in it for the long haul, hopefully with a new hip, and then there's this, possibility of needing to have it replaced again at some point. So the revision operation. What are your thoughts around sort of eventually maybe needing a revision hip replacement? What were your thoughts sort of at the time of having it, and what are your thoughts around it now? And when your patients ask you about it, what kind of things do you say?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's something that's changed quite a lot. Because I think when it all happened, I was extremely mindful of the fact that I needed to get as long out of this as possible, because as someone in their late 20s, if I'm lucky enough for mine to last, 20, 25 years, then I don't want to have a third replacement. So, that was something that was really, really strong in my mind. So, as soon as the hip had gone in, I was absolutely militant, like no running, no jumping, nothing like high impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was necessary to do that for the initial part. And then I met people that were like, I've gone back to marathon training and things after mine. And I was thinking, wow, that's so silly. Like, why on earth would you do something so crazy? But then at the end of the day, if that's your dream and goal in life is to run a marathon, why let a hip replacement stop you? So I think I'm still very much on the conservative side. Like, I don't unnecessarily run. I do everything non-weight bearing. I do a lot of cycling, swimming, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to completely let it stop me doing everything that I want to do. Otherwise, I just won't live a particularly meaningful life for 25 years until my hip needs replacing again. And I wish I'd, so I think that in answer to the question, I think beforehand I was extremely militant about what I was going to do and how to protect it. And then now my idea of that has changed somewhat with, well, I need to also have some semblance of life as well.
Yeah. Interesting. So, and of course, as more people share their experiences and their stories, there's as you've encountered, so someone training for a marathon, and I, not too long ago, I met someone who's professionally competing in triathlons with a new hip in. So so there's, as with everything, there's the full range, but and in terms of how your hip is now, so how, what would you say to yourself as a 28, 29-year-old about the new hip and how it's going to turn out, looking back now?
I guess I hadn't really thought about it, because there was so much uncertainty. All I was thinking about was setting the goal for getting it done, and then setting the goal to look after it as long as possible. And then now my kind of older self is kind of saying, well, you know what, it's gone really, really well. You're very lucky. I've had absolutely zero pain. Thankfully, it doesn't squeak much. And, I've managed to find a moderation in what I'm able physically to do. That isn't as limiting as I thought it would be. So, that's a massive, massive bonus.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really positive. And you mentioned that it doesn't squeak much. So there's some movements or some occasions when it does squeak a bit.
Yeah. So I'm not a particularly flexible person, and a friend of mine is an orthopaedic registrar, and he keeps telling me that I need to improve my flexibility to make the wear pattern better. So I've recently been embarking on trying to improve my flexibility, and in certain positions I can actually feel a squeak, which is very unnerving at first, but then you realise that that's probably just part and parcel of it.
Yeah. Okay. But so all in all, it sounds like it's been, you had a bit of a rocky road in the first couple of weeks, more so than expected. But apart from that, it sounds like it's worked out really well, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the exact summary. The first 4-6 weeks were horrible, and the rest of it's been absolutely life-changing. So, it's been a great experience, and I'm grateful to everyone who helped me along the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, and of course, as I said at the start, everyone's experience will be different, but hopefully this conversation will help to answer some questions that might be bubbling out there with a few people who are in a similar situation. But before we sign off, Zach, is there anything that you would want to add, or any sort of final comments or anything like that?
No, I think I've covered most of it. Like I said to you, I think the big take-home message I always give to everyone is you have to give yourself to the process, because you can't do anything about it, and then you have to give everything to the recovery, and then you'll get everything out of it. So that's my little kind of piece that I say to people.
Yeah, well, I think that's excellent advice to end it on. So thanks so much, Zach. Thanks so much for joining us. And as always, thank you to everyone out there for sending in these the questions that we've covered today. Do keep the questions coming in. And of course, if you haven't signed up to the Joint School app already, then there'll be a link below the video where you can sign up to the app and have a look at some of the other videos, resources, and the self-tracking tools and the exercises and the things that are on there. And please do let us know what you think about the app and these videos. So until next time, thank you very much, everyone.